staying tuned. This is Smooth 98.1, freshly pressed time here as part of Smooth Breakfast this morning with Kayode Baker.
And Ayo Mairo Ese.
Good morning. Now, joining us this morning for our news of analysis this morning, we have our guest analysts. We have, first of all, here Deveo Okorie. Good morning, Deveo.
Good morning, Lagos. Ayo Kayode Eku, National Assembly Deja Vu.
All right, thank you very much, Deveo. You're very welcome. You can reach Deveo on Twitter at Deveo Okorie. We also have with us, we haven't heard his voice for a while. He's back. Gbolahan. Good morning, Gbolahan.
Good morning, Ayo, and good morning, Lagos.
Good
Good morning,
morning.
Kayode as well.
Good morning, Bala. Welcome.
You can find Gbolahan at Mr. G Quest on Twitter. You can find us on Twitter at Smooth981FM. And when you do find us and you want to react to any of the stories this morning, you can use the hashtag freshlypressed981. You can also send us messages on WhatsApp. You can send your messages to
0809-444-0981 to be part of the conversation.
All right, we'll go straight into our stories for this morning. Our first story here is a big one this morning, and just to mention that if you'd like to get more details about this, it was actually spoken about or spoken in detail during Business Express 981 with Rotus and Jolomi earlier this morning. But well, I'll come to you for this one. Finally, CBN cuts benchmark interest by 0.5% 2 years after. Daily Times news reports.
Yes, this is quite huge for the economy. This is a very big news for the Nigerian economy, and it's actually signaling where the CBN is actually looking at and the direction at which CBN is looking at. Just as you mentioned, the MPR, which is the monetary policy rate, and that's the rate that all banks actually follow in deciding how much they are going to be lending for the rate at which they're going to be lending at or so. So for over 2 years now, since July 2016, the monetary policy rate had been benchmarked at 14%. And I mean, they've had several meetings since July 2016, and the rate hadn't actually moved. A lot of people had been clamoring for the rate to move, especially when Nigeria was actually going into a recession then in 2016, for the rate to be adjusted so that at least there can be money in the system and then the banks can lend more at cheaper rate. But this move wasn't actually taken then, and the CBN actually kept on the rate at 14%. And the reason why they kept the rate at 14% is that, of course, when we look at it over the years, of course, the inflation had been trending at about 18%. This was in 2017.
Yeah.
We were also looking at an exchange rate as well too that was fluctuating, and at some point as well too in about 2016, later part of 2016 to January of 2017, we were looking at the dollar as about 520 naira to the dollar then. So of course the CBN had to tighten as at that point in time in order to keep a lead and a close control on all these economic challenges that we were facing as at that point in time. But now, several years down the line, of course, they're looking at the trend. The naira has been stable for quite a while now, and I have to give it up to the CBN at least, even though people question the method and the means at which they've been able to keep the naira stable.
Yes.
Of course, we're talking about multiple windows that we're looking at the moment. We're talking about several windows anyway, and the naira rate is trading at different rates, 347, 360 in different markets. But one way or the other, right now at the moment, what we're finding out is that the rates have been converging at the moment.
Yes.
They're converging towards the 360 level.
Yes.
And it's been stable as well too since 2017 as well, to when they came up with the INE window.
Now, just to ask you,
Yes.
it's great you're talking about the naira
Yes.
because a number of people, which the CBN governor, Godwin Emefiele, also reacted. Some people were a bit quite apprehensive that the reduction could reinforce pressure on the naira, like you're speaking about,
Yes.
and his response was an emphatic no. He's said that, according to the reports, that the answer is a capital no. I don't see that. Like I just told you, that we have seen stability in the market over the last 2.5 years, and there is no need for anybody to be worried.
Yes.
Because even this morning during Business Express, some people
Yes.
also asked the question: if some people are wondering what the impact, because at the end of the day, it's not just the announcements
Yes.
that matter to people, it's what the impact on the market would be for the people.
Well, I think what would be more of an impact to our exchange rate would actually be one, the inflow of FPIs into the economy from foreign investors.
Okay.
Two, the oil price as well. Too, how much is oil trading at? And currently, the oil price is actually looking good at the moment. Now we're talking about $67 a barrel presently at the moment. So when we look at those, I think those play a major role in determining the exchange rate over the MPR rate anyway. I mean, when we're talking about the MPR rate, we're actually looking at trying to keep a lead on inflation, also trying to encourage more banks to lend as well too. So 0.5%, it's significant, but I wouldn't actually say it's significant enough to have an impact on the exchange rate. So, but I would actually want to point out as well in conclusion is I would like to see how the banks are now going to take on this as well, because often enough, you find out that the CBN does reduce the rate, but then it doesn't actually translate into lending as well. It doesn't actually translate into the banks reducing their rates as well, too, because the whole idea behind this is to spur growth, is to encourage more jobs being created in the agri sector, in the real sector as well too. And we know as well too that when we're exchange rate is indirectly proportional to the number of jobs that you also do create. If you can borrow cheaply, then you're encouraged to want to lend to expand your business more as well too. So that's the whole philosophy behind this. But we're looking at the banks. What are they going to do next? Are they going to pass this on?
No, the banks usually respond commensurately.
Good.
Right. Thank you very much indeed, Gbolahan. If you'd like to get, like I mentioned earlier on, you can play back today's show. You can play it back on YouTube. We're streaming live at the moment, so you can actually join us there /youtube.com/smooth981fm, or you can also refer to Reuters earlier this morning during Business Express 981. And moving on to our next story, Deveo, I'll come to you for this one. In the new Telegraph, we have here Lawan, Gbajabiamila's endorsement unconstitutional. And this is according to Mohammed Ali Ndume, APC Borno South. Now, he's one of the top contenders as well for the office of the Senate President. I wouldn't say too much detail. I'll let you take us through this story. Please.
Well, for those who felt that the politicking had ended, this is politics 2.0. And just right after the general elections, the formations have not completely been brought to bear. And in this case, the National Assembly, which is actually the key organ of government that represents you and I. Now, they're looking at the 9th Assembly and trying to come up with their key officers. And at the moment, the APC being the largest party having members within both the Senate and the House of Representatives has given an indication with the meeting that they had with their chairman, that's Oshimole, where he indicated some individuals who the party will be looking at vying for that position. That's what's his name? Lawan, as well as
Gbajabiamila.
Yes. Now, but there's some other party members who also have put a strong opposition to that. That's in the name of Ndume. Ndume, my man, has always been there, and he
not just Ndume. A number of people have.
Yes, a number of other.
In recent times, we've seen a number of people who have indicated interest.
Yes, interest in that same position.
Yes.
Now, the truth is, why do we call this a deja vu? What happened in 2015? That was when Sarakia and Ekorimadu came up through a deft move when a like fashion meeting by the party held place in a venue outside the assembly, where a move was made in negotiation with the PDP, who had smaller members, and they got enough and formed quorum and brought in what was referred to as opposition within a party, right?
Yeah.
Now, many have said that should never have happened. However, you see, Ndume's point is that he believes that the party should not impose officers, that it's such portends to crisis. Now, there's a history to this.
Apart from crisis, he refers to the Constitution as well. He uses the Constitution, Section 50, subsection 1A as amended, the 1999 Constitution to defend his case, to defend his point. Do you think that holds merit with
Well,
regards to
I
not
mean,
meddling?
that's actually due to procedure because at the
Yes.
end of the day, the members will vote.
Yes.
The party is only trying to ensure that they, as the chairman had said, it's only in their rights having the most members to be able to choose. However, we know that the assembly has had a history of independence. It didn't start with the 9th or the 7th or even the 6th assembly.
Yes.
They've always had a way of trying to ensure that they are independent, because what we want to avoid is where the assembly is a rubber stamp of the executive. Now, for them to remain independent, what you require is a negotiation, because this assembly appointment requires a negotiation not just within the party but also outside the party, because as you would hear other external members, PDP I think has at least 1/3, even though it's not enough, but at least it can form some kind of quorum just like they did before. So you need to be careful while you impose, or else what happened in 2019 might happen again. Two, we also want an assembly that not only will it support the mandate of the executive, but we want them to be able to remember they represent we the people. They don't represent the interest of the executive or the politicians.
party,
So
yes.
we the people also must be careful that the senators or the representatives always at all times represent our interest. And this is where we lose it most of the time. We forget that the accountability that we vested in them by electing them is what they are meant to do to keep the executive in check. So if you have a case whereby the executive in a way appoint or have their own people get in there as leaders, then you're going to have a repetition of the weak and limp state assemblies. Currently, most governors have some level of influence and authority on their state assembly. That's why we don't hear much from them. Whatever they say goes. Whatever they want to have hidden hides. Whatever they want out comes out.
All right, thank you very much indeed. Like Ali Ndume warned, they do not want to see a repeat of what happened in 2015, but we're watching very closely. They haven't yet appointed or voted or elected the leaders of both houses, so we will be giving you updates on that particular story. We'll take some comments from WhatsApp.
This one here from Trevor's Lapel says, financial analyst Gbolahan, solid take on the rate cut by the CBN. And Tosin from Aja says, there's something wrong with the internet version. Okay, we'll take a look at that and we'll see where it goes.
Well, thank you very much. I think he's pointing out the our online stream. We'll check it out. Thank you very much for noting that.
This one here says there will be no impact from the NPR rate cut, 50 basis point cut with level of liquidity tightness in the interbank market equals zero impact. Unfortunately, our markets are atypical.
All right, thank you very much. All right, we'll move on to our next story here. Interesting one. Again, we're still talking money. We spoke about the market. Now, Gbolahan, I'm back to you again. As Trevor Noah's lapel pin said, you're a financial analyst. This one now, VAT increment not targeted at the poor. This is coming from the FIRS boss, Tunde Fowler. Now, he's mentioned that when you're talking about there's some luxury goods that poor people cannot afford anyway, and that's where the impact of VAT is felt more. So actually it protects the interests of the poor and not affects them negatively. Can you please take us through the story?
Yes, I think there's been a lot of debate and a lot of talk about increasing our VAT, which is value added tax on consumption and then luxury items as well. This conversation has been going on for several years now, so because Nigeria actually pays one of the lowest VAT rates in the world.
Yes.
I mean, we're talking 5% as at present, and this 5% has been what we've been paying for decades now. And I'll compare it to Ghana, which is just our brothers just next door.
Our brother, Charlie.
Yes, and they're paying 12.5% in Ghana. In Kenya, they're paying 16%. In South Africa, they're paying 15% VAT. So in Nigeria, when we're looking at it, we're cash strapped. We're looking at alternatives and ways of generating revenue for the government. We have to be very creative about how and what we do to increase this revenue base. And one of the measures of increasing the revenue base is obviously taxing people a little bit more as well too. And another form of taxation is the value-added tax. So, of course, hearing that we're going to be taxed more, many are scared that, we're going to be taxing the lower income people, the poor and all that. It's
Now, I just wanted to clarify
Yes.
something. It's interesting that the FIRS boss has come out to talk about the impact of the increment of the tax, so that
Yes.
he's saying to the poor, the rich. However, 7 days ago, the news first broke that FIRS was considering a tax increase.
Yes.
And then the next day, they released a statement saying, no, we're not increasing, we're just increasing the tax bracket. So what are they really doing? Because here we now have him talking about, if there's a tax increment, it won't affect. Is there going to be a 50% increase in the tax or
It's
not?
what-
There are different forms of taxes as well too. I
Mm.
mean, when you're talking about not increasing the direct taxes, which
Yeah.
is the taxes that you levy on people's income.
No, but it's VAT he was talking about.
Oh, if he was talking about VAT,
Yeah.
then that's a bit confusing. Then
Yeah.
if 1 minute you're saying that you're not increasing the VAT taxes, then the next minute you're saying you're increasing it as well. But ideally, I mean, this article is actually talking about increasing the VAT.
He didn't say directly, but he's just talking about in the event. So I'm thinking, if
Absolutely.
you're not planning to increase it, why are you trying to tell us how it will
There-
affect
there's
people?
there's
or not?
there's an argument currently that is going on anyway, generally, which is that you're not generating enough taxes, you're not taxing people enough. So how about you increase the tax base
Bracket.
and increase the tax bracket first before you talk about now levying people more? Because of course it does make a lot of sense as well too, because if you only have maybe 10% of the working force or of the population currently paying taxes.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, what's happening to the rest as well too that are working as well? Why are they not paying their taxes? We have a lot of people that are in the informal sectors who are not really contributing their quota as well. So how about increasing that bracket of first before you talk about the VAT? But then we will still end up having this conversation of increasing the VAT. And just as I said, it's a way of broadening the government's income. The only question that we, the people, ask is that the money is used judiciously, they spend it appropriately for building roads, good schools, education, healthcare. I mean, money has to be spent appropriately. If you're going to be taxing people, then we have to see the dividend of that taxes.
All right, thank you so much. We have a reaction to this story. Omasan from Lekki.
This one says you keep comparing VAT with these countries without taking the other pieces on the plates. Ghanaians have more purchasing power and better cost of living, for example, and they are not double taxed. You pay taxes, toll gate, and then pay your street to do road developments. Ridiculous. This is
They pay tolls in Ghana as well too. It's
Omasan
unreal.
from Lekki.
All right, thank you very much, Omasan. We have here very quickly, residents panic as crisis broke out in Amukoko. This is from the Vanguard newspaper. We see there were sporadic gunshots yesterday in the densely populated Ajegunle area of Lagos. And just linking this also to reports from Aja as well, where we
Right.
hear that following the death of the Lumegbo of Lagos, that we had some unfortunate unrest in that area. Ivo, can you please take us through the story?
Well, as usual, Lagos being the large city it is, has had incidences of gang wars in various locations. Now, in this case here in Amukoko, it was between the Tire, Akpata, and Market Boys, and started since December, and they've had a lot of backlashes, back and forth, even to the extent that many have been caught up in the crossfire. Now, obviously, this requires a conscientious effort from the police, who have time after time, especially in Lagos, shown that they can deal with some of these community skirmishes. I remember Fatah Woshene, Edgar Omohe, they had done a lot of surgical work in trying to root out a lot of the then community disturbances from a lot of these gangs, especially if you remember the Badu boys at that time that were oppressing the people in, I think that was a Magodo area. Now, it's a cosmopolitan city. There is a huge cost when there's a threat to security. It affects not only it affects residents, it affects foreigners, it affects visitors, it affects events, it affects business. So I'm hoping the police is going squarely into this. Ambode is still on seat, and I expect him to act accordingly and swiftly to ensure that they can contain this in no time sooner than later.
All right, thank you very much, Ivo.
All right, well, once again, let's come to you with this story. It says here, federal government blames importers for failure of importing locally made goods. And they're saying that it challenges the drive to promote patronage of locally made goods in the country. And Minister of Agriculture, Ayo, he said this when he appeared before the National Assembly Joint Committee on Agriculture in Abuja to defend its budget.
Let me reword the headline. The FG passes the bulk and blames importers for failure to promote locally made goods. Come on, let's stop crying foul. I think the FG, it's in their responsibility and their mandate to actually promote locally made goods if they have an issue. Well, the Minister of Agriculture was speaking at a forum, and he did mention that the importers who bring in toothpicks, sugar, vegetables, pencils are the ones frustrating government's efforts to ensure local patronization of goods. Now, this is also despite the FX bans and restrictions that are already in place. These are just lamentations. He now said that toothpick costs the federal government $80 million every year. Tomato costs about $400 million. Tomato sellers are not able to, push their goods. Now let's look at this critically. In the tomato situation, yes, there's a huge import of tomato paste from other countries versus local supply and even production. But there's a reason why. Obviously, production cost is expensive here. Two, all the issues, the attendant issues that affect domestic capacity, which is really the issue at stake here, affecting local consumption, where you speak of funding, you speak of transportation, you speak of storage, you speak of local pricing. These are all market forces, which I expect the federal government to work at creating the enabling environment to ensure that local production in all areas, not just agriculture, is ramped up. So I don't expect the minister to be lamenting. I expect him to be coming out with some policies that are going to. They've done a few.
Well, if you were to recommend, what would be your recommendations?
That's why I said policy enabling, community enabling. Many of the players already have had many stakeholder meetings that they have created functions. In some cases, goods have been banned. In some cases, they have been placed FX, like the CBN always speaks of the FX ban on some goods. That's in a bid to help local capacity. But it doesn't end there. There's also an enabling environment that you need to create in terms of transportation, which drives up power alone, ramps up like 30% on operations on most local produced goods. So how do you compete with the foreign ones? Well, there's a debate on duties that of goods that are coming in. There needs to be a balance there, so you don't hold Nigerians to ransom. So what I expect is more policies, and this is the next level. The next level discussion should be about creating an enabling environment so that we can ramp local capacity. But I can assure you, when you have not dealt with infrastructure, it is very difficult for you to create that local environment that will enable local manufacturers, producers, farmers, and those within the processing angle to be able to meet up with the competition that's coming from external imports.
All right. Thank you very much for that one. Let's come to you with this one, Gbolahan. It's from Thisday newspaper. It says, IG laments poor police funding. And what the story reads, the acting Inspector General of Police, Mr. Abubakar Mohammed, has lamented the underfunding of the Nigerian police, and he says that was the major challenge really that's confronting them.
Yes, I mean, this conversation is something that we've had over the years, and it's obvious anyway for us to see every time when we engage with our police forces on the street and at the police station. You approach the police officers at the police stations and they tell you that there's no fuel in the car to transport themselves, and they do not have the recharge card to make the phone calls or to do the necessary things. I mean, there's generally a lot of hindrances from the police forces when we have incidences. So the IG of police is talking about, of course, the underfunding of the police force, and it's been reported several years ago that we do not have enough police officers in the country that is policing. Right now, at the moment, generally we have about one police officer to about 600 citizens or so in the country. Is it 350 now? Yeah. Really?
Approximately.
Okay. All right. So we have about 350, but when we're talking about the standard, though, it should be far lower than that, also international standard or so. So right now at the moment we're really underfunded when we're talking about the police forces as well, and a lot needs to be done in funding the police officers as well so that they can actually do their job adequately. I mean, the article also talks about the reforms that is actually also going on as well. So it's talking about the Police Reform Trust Fund bill, which has been lingering in the National Assembly for quite a while, and this is meant to be looking at creative ways of funding the police force, just as Lagos State is also done as well too with the Lagos State Security Trust Fund. I mean, since that had come on board, we've seen significant improvement in the Lagos police forces as well too. We've seen them having more articulated armored vehicles as well too, and we've seen them looking much better as well too. So there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of funding for the police officers, so that at least they can protect the lives and properties of citizens in the society. And so that's what this article is speaking to. The government just needs to do more. We need to be more creative about funding.
All right. Thank you very much. Indeed, now talking about being creative about funding, we still have comments coming in from WhatsApp, Twitter, and you can send your messages to YouTube as well on the taxes. Now, Chioma says, in my opinion, I think before they start talking about tax increase, they should work on strengthening tax collection and transparency in what these taxes are used for. On Twitter, at Helen Alfredi, Lady Rose says, when you compare Nigeria VAT with that of Ghana, Kenya, you need to compare the per capita income as well. And then we have here as well, instead of managing and using the available huge resources for the good of the people, we are talking of increasing VAT, which we know will be embezzled. No to VAT tax increase. For Logan Care here says, Bado in Ikorodu, talking about the stories about the crisis in Amukoko, relating it to the previous crisis we've seen in other areas. And then we have here Adinka from Ikoyi saying, if the objective is to increase revenue base, then the austerity measures must start by reducing the cost of governance, national and state assembly wages, etc. Reduce that first, and then we can talk about widening the tax bracket or increasing the
So they're long too. They're not going to listen to that.
Okay, Gbolahan, let's come back to you real quick with this one. From Guardian newspaper, it says police most corrupt institution in Nigeria. A new survey released by the Socioeconomic Rights and Accountability Project, SERAP, exposed high levels of sleaze in public institutions nationwide in the last 5 years, with the police emerging the most corrupt. What are your thoughts?
Yes, well, I mean, can we say we're really surprised about this? You know, following on from the conversation that we just had previously from the last story that we were talking about. Anyway, this story, SERAP did actually conduct this survey in September, between September and December of 2018. And they found out that, of course, there were quite a lot of corrupt institutions that we have, but the police ranks number one amongst them lot. We have the power sector as well, too, as one of those, the judiciary, education, and the health ministry. Invariably, all the sectors that we're really engaging with is corrupt or so. Yeah. And so they were talking about the level of corruption. This was 70% of the Nigerian population, not 70% of the people that carried out the survey did actually say that in that survey, there's a very high chance, which is about 54%, of the interactions that you get with a police officer, you're more than likely to bribe a police officer or so, 54% of the time. Some are even reporting up to
the survey.
Yeah, according to the survey. Some are even reporting 63%. And then when you look at it as well, what does that say about the image of the police? I mean, if we sit in this room, I can count numerous stories that I've had or encounters that I've had.
Here.
Yes.
So out of 4 people, let's see how many people have, either bribed at some point or the other.
They should give the police a break.
No. I mean, this is according to
So according to survey, so you can do the survey, you can count the numerous times you've had an engagement with the police and how that has ended as well too. So they're saying that, look, there's a lot that needs to be done in the police force, in reforming the police, because of course when we're talking about corruption, it's inimical to growth, it's inimical to justice as well. So you will never get justice in an area where you find out that there's a high level of corruption. So we need to find ways of stemming this out of our system so that we can get good value for money and we can get justice as well served. So I hope this report is going to be taken fully on board, because this is not actually the first time that we've had this report. The Nigerian Bureau of Statistics did actually have this report as well, in conjunction with one of the United Nations organization as well, and it was a similar report that we did get. This was about I think it was in 2017 or so that report came out, 17 or 18 anyway. And it said the same thing. The police needs to be reformed and we need to do better in presenting a cleaner image.
Thank you very much, Gbolahan. A final story, just as we were mentioning, Lagos Task Force suspends officer for extortion. This comes from the Daily Times. Because of time, though, we can't really take the story.
But do you have a statement on that one?
Well, what they're
Just one
encouraging
line.
is whistleblowing Lagos State. If you see officers erring, please report them. They didn't give a number, but to your local authorities.
All right, thank you very much. Now, thank you so much, Lagos, for being a part of today's discussion. Please, SOJ, just ending with the SOJ's comment here on WhatsApp. Please, where do you put the legislature? Is it by volume or value? So questions right there. But, well, like you mentioned, a number of agencies were indicted in this particular report. That's all we can take this morning on Freshly Pressed 981. Thank you for engaging with us on WhatsApp, on Twitter, on YouTube as well. You can follow, you can watch the video again on YouTube. Just follow us and subscribe to our page, Smooth 91 FM. Thank you very much, Gbolahan, for coming this morning. You can follow him at Mr. G Quest on Twitter. Thank you, Deveo. You can follow him at Deveo Okorie, and you can hear his voice during Lagos Talks 91 as well. Thank you, Lagos. We'll be right back. Now, don't forget, we have a special at 9 o'clock where you get to call in. We're talking education. Now, talking about corruption and some agencies or some institutions that we need to look at. We will be looking at that in detail, and we have a special guest joining us. We'll be back at 8:15 for the locker room.